Göbekli Tepe, the world's first temple. Hello, dear scholars. Welcome back to another gentle journey through history. Tonight, we're going to travel together to a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, to a place that has quietly rewritten everything we thought we knew about our ancient ancestors. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe. Imagine, if you will, standing on a windswept hill in the morning light. Below you, the Harran Plain stretches out in all directions. The air is still and cool. And beneath your feet, beneath the soil and grass, lie massive stone pillars that have been waiting in darkness for over 11,000 years. Göbekli Tepe. The name means potbelly hill in Turkish. A modest name for what may be the most important archaeological discovery of our time. For tonight, we'll explore this ancient wonder together. There's no rush. No deadlines. Just the slow unfolding of a story that begins at the very dawn of human civilization, in a time so distant that it challenges our imagination. So settle in. Get comfortable. And let's travel back beyond the pyramids, beyond the first cities, beyond agriculture itself, to a time when our ancestors created something that still takes our breath away. Let's begin. Part 1, The Discovery. Our story begins, as so many great discoveries do, almost by accident. In 1963, an archaeological survey team from the University of Istanbul was working in southeastern Turkey. They noticed something unusual on a hilltop, scattered limestone fragments and flint tools dotting the surface. They made a note. They marked it on their maps. They classified it as a medieval cemetery, and then they moved on. For 30 years, the hill slept on. Farmers grazed their animals there. Children played on its slopes. No one knew what lay beneath. But in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was reviewing old survey records. Something about that hilltop caught his attention. The description didn't quite add up. Medieval cemeteries didn't usually have flint tools scattered about. Schmidt decided to take a closer look. What he found that day would change his life, and change archaeology forever. Just beneath the surface, Schmidt's team uncovered the top of a massive T-shaped limestone pillar. Then another. And another. These weren't medieval grave markers. These were something far, far older. As they carefully excavated, the scale of what they'd found became clear. These pillars stood over 15 feet tall. They weighed up to 10 tons each. And they were covered, absolutely covered, in elaborate carvings of animals. But here's what made Klaus Schmidt stop and stare in disbelief. The pottery scattered around the site, the style of the flint tools, the carbon dating of the organic material, everything pointed to the same impossible conclusion. This site was over 11,000 years old. 11,000 years. To put that in perspective, the Great Pyramid of Giza is about 4,500 years old. Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old. The earliest cities in Mesopotamia are about 6,000 years old. Göbekli Tepe was already ancient when all of those were built. It predates pottery. It predates the wheel. It predates agriculture as we understand it. And yet here it was, massive, sophisticated, deliberately planned and constructed. Klaus Schmidt would spend the rest of his life excavating this site. He died in 2014, still working there, still uncovering its secrets. And even now, more than 30 years after that first discovery, we've only excavated about 5% of Göbekli Tepe. The rest still waits beneath the hill. Part 2, What they built. Let's take a moment to really understand what was built at Göbekli Tepe. Imagine standing in the center of one of these structures on a cool morning, thousands of years ago. You're standing in a circular enclosure, roughly 30 to 90 feet across. The floor beneath your feet is smooth limestone, carefully leveled. Around you, in a circle, stand massive T-shaped pillars, each one carved from solid bedrock and dragged here from quarries nearby. These pillars aren't crude or rough. They are precisely shaped, their surfaces smooth and carefully finished. And in the very center of the circle, two even larger pillars stand face to face. These central pillars can reach 18 feet in height. They seem to watch over the space, silent sentinels carved from stone. But it's what covers these pillars that truly captivates. Running your hand over the stone, you'd feel the carved reliefs beneath your fingers. Animals, everywhere. Snakes slithering down the pillar's length. Foxes prowling. Gazelles leaping. Wild boar charging. Cranes and vultures with their wings spread wide. Spiders. Scorpions. Lions. Ducks. Even insects, carved with surprising detail. Some pillars show strange abstract symbols, circles and crescents, cup marks, H-shaped figures that we still don't fully understand. And on a few pillars, you'd find something else. Arms. Hands. Carved in low relief, suggesting that these T-shaped stones might represent people. Stylized human figures, standing in eternal assembly. Now, here's what makes this even more remarkable. So far, archaeologists have identified at least 20 of these circular structures at Göbekli Tepe. 20 separate enclosures, each one carefully planned and built. But they weren't all built at the same time. The site shows distinct layers, distinct phases of construction spanning perhaps 1,500 years or more. The oldest structures, the deepest ones, are actually the most sophisticated. The pillars are larger, the carvings more elaborate, the construction more precise. As time went on, the structures became smaller, simpler, as if the knowledge or the will to create such monuments was gradually fading. And here's something else unusual. After a period of use, these structures were deliberately buried. Not destroyed. Not abandoned. Buried. Carefully filled in with limestone rubble and soil, sometimes mixed with animal bones and flint tools. And then, a new structure would be built nearby. And eventually, it too would be buried. Why? Why would people invest so much effort in creating these monuments, only to bury them and start again? We don't know. Not yet. But what we do know is this: creating these structures required planning, organization, and labor on a scale that we didn't think existed in this era. Let's talk about what that means. Each of these massive pillars had to be quarried from bedrock. Archaeologists have found the quarries, not far from the main site. You can still see unfinished pillars lying there, partially carved from the living rock. The workers used only stone tools. No metal. They would have pounded the limestone with harder stones, gradually carving out these monolithic pillars. This would have taken weeks or months for a single pillar. Then came the truly backbreaking work. These pillars, weighing up to 10 tons or more, had to be moved from the quarry to the construction site. Without wheels. Without beasts of burden. Without metal tools or pulleys. Just human muscle, ropes made from plant fibers, wooden levers, and patience. Teams of workers would have slowly dragged these stones across the landscape, perhaps on wooden rollers or sledges. Once at the site, the pillars had to be raised upright and positioned precisely. This required coordination, engineering knowledge, and probably some kind of ramp or scaffolding system. And then, the carving could begin. Or perhaps the carving was done before they moved the pillars. Either way, someone had to carefully chip away the limestone, creating these detailed animal reliefs with nothing but stone tools and skill. Think about what this means in terms of human organization. This wasn't a small family group working on a personal project. This required dozens, maybe hundreds of people working together. It required planning and leadership. It required feeding all those workers. It required maintaining tools, organizing shifts, solving engineering problems as they arose. And remember, these people were supposedly hunter-gatherers. Mobile groups following animal herds and seasonal plants. But you can't build Göbekli Tepe while wandering from place to place. This required people to stay. To commit. To work together toward a common goal, possibly for years or even generations. This required something we didn't think existed yet. It required civilization. Part 3. The people who built it. So who were these people? These ancient architects who created something so far beyond what we expected of their era? To understand them, we need to understand their world. 12,000 years ago, the Earth was emerging from the last ice age. The great glacier that had covered much of the northern hemisphere were retreating. The climate was warming. And in the Middle East, particularly in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent, something remarkable was happening. The warming climate brought increased rainfall to the region. Grasslands expanded. Wild wheat and barley grew in abundance. Herds of gazelles, aurochs, and wild sheep multiplied. For the hunter-gatherer groups living there, this was paradise. The region around Göbekli Tepe sits in what archaeologists call the Golden Triangle, an area where wild ancestors of modern wheat, barley, and other crops grew naturally. Where herds of game animals were plentiful. Where there were stones for tools, wood for fires, and water from seasonal streams. The people living here weren't struggling to survive. They were thriving. From the tools and animal bones found at the site, we can piece together aspects of their lives. They hunted. Oh, how they hunted! Gazelle bones are abundant at the site, along with remains of wild cattle, wild boar, and other game. These people were skilled hunters, probably working in coordinated groups to bring down large animals. They gathered wild plants, wild cereals, nuts, fruits. They knew their landscape intimately, knew where to find food in every season. They made beautiful stone tools. The flint blades found at Göbekli Tepe are remarkably well crafted. Some are tiny, delicate microliths. Others are larger scrapers and knives. Each one speaks to specialized knowledge and practiced skill. They didn't make pottery yet. That technology would come later. But they did create stone bowls and vessels, carved from limestone. And they traveled. Among the artifacts found at Göbekli Tepe are obsidian blades. Obsidian, volcanic glass, that came from sources hundreds of miles away. This means trade networks existed. People were moving, exchanging goods, sharing ideas across vast distances. But here's what we don't find at Göbekli Tepe: evidence of permanent habitation. There are no remains of houses. No hearths for cooking. No storage pits for grain. No trash middens with the accumulated debris of daily life. People came here, worked here, held ceremonies here, but they didn't live here. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a settlement. It was something else. It was a gathering place. A ceremonial center. Perhaps a temple. Think about what this means. Groups of people, perhaps coming from miles around, converging on this hilltop. Maybe they came for seasonal festivals. Maybe for religious ceremonies. Maybe for communal feasts. And over time, together, they built these monuments. The animal bones found at the site give us clues. Thousands of bones, from hundreds of animals, all butchered and consumed. These weren't everyday meals. These were feasts. Great gatherings where animals were slaughtered, cooked, and shared among many people. Klaus Schmidt believed that Göbekli Tepe was built by what he called a cathedral on a hill model. Different groups, different tribes, would come together to contribute to its construction. Building the temple was itself a communal act, a way of creating bonds between groups. And maybe, just maybe, it was this need to gather regularly, this need to coordinate and cooperate, that led to something revolutionary. Agriculture. The traditional story we tell about human history goes like this: first, people discovered agriculture. They settled down to tend their crops. Settlement led to food surpluses. Surpluses led to specialization. Specialization led to civilization. And civilization eventually led to monuments and temples. In other words, agriculture came first, then came the temples. But Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. The temple came first. And maybe the need to support large gatherings, the need to feed hundreds of people congregating at this sacred site, was what drove people to start cultivating wild grains more intentionally. Maybe they started planting cereals near the site, not yet as farmers, but as provisioners for their rituals. Maybe religion, not food, was the spark that ignited the agricultural revolution. It's a radical idea. It turns our understanding upside down. But standing among these ancient stones, it's hard not to wonder. Part 4, the symbolism and meaning. Let's turn now to perhaps the deepest mystery of Göbekli Tepe. What did it all mean? What were these people trying to say with their carvings, their pillars, their great enclosures? Looking at the animal reliefs that cover the pillars, certain patterns emerge. The most commonly depicted creatures are dangerous ones. Snakes, scorpions, spiders, lions, boars. These aren't the gentle animals. These are the ones that could kill you. Why? One possibility is that these carvings represent a worldview, a cosmology. Perhaps these animals represented forces or spirits. Perhaps they were totems for different clans or groups. Perhaps depicting them in stone was a way of gaining power over them, or honoring them, or recording their importance in the people's spiritual landscape. Some pillars show what might be narrative scenes. On Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, we see a rich composition. A vulture clutches what might be a human head. A scorpion looms nearby. Strange disc-like symbols float above. Some researchers have suggested this might represent constellations, an early form of astronomical recording. Others believe it depicts shamanic visions or mythological stories now lost to time. The truth is, we're looking at a symbolic language we can barely read. Imagine someone 12,000 years from now finding the Statue of Liberty. They could describe it, a woman holding a torch and a tablet, wearing a crown with spikes. But would they understand what it meant to us? Would they grasp the ideas of freedom, democracy, welcoming immigrants? We're in the same position with Göbekli Tepe. We can describe what we see, but the deeper meanings, the stories, the beliefs, the reasons, remain tantalizingly out of reach. But let's explore some of the theories. The animal carvings might represent a sacred bestiary, a catalogue of spiritually significant creatures. In many traditional societies, animals are seen as more than just food or threats. They're teachers, spirits, ancestors, symbols of qualities humans admire or fear. A snake might represent transformation, as it sheds its skin. A lion might represent strength and courage. A vulture might represent death and renewal, as it consumes the dead and soars to the heavens. If Göbekli Tepe was a religious site, and most archaeologists believe it was, then these animals might have been central to that religion. Perhaps each enclosure was dedicated to different animal spirits or deities. Perhaps rituals performed here invoked these powers. Perhaps young people came here for initiation ceremonies, to learn the sacred stories associated with each creature. And then there are those mysterious T-shaped pillars themselves. As I mentioned earlier, some bear carved arms and hands, suggesting they might represent stylized humans. But they wear no faces. No individual features. They're deliberately abstract. Some archaeologists believe these pillars represent ancestors. Great founders of clans or lineages, standing in eternal assembly. The enclosures would then be gathering places where the living could commune with the dead. Others think they might represent gods or spirits. Beings more than human, worthy of these massive monuments. The central pillars in each enclosure are always taller than the others. They face each other across the space. Are they a pair of deities? A divine couple? Dueling forces, light and dark, sky and earth, male and female? Or are they simply the most important ancestors, the founders, watching over their descendants? We find ourselves in the realm of speculation. Educated guessing based on comparative studies of other cultures, other religions, other sacred sites. But the people who built Göbekli Tepe left no written records. They couldn't. Writing wouldn't be invented for another 6,000 years. Their voices are silent. And yet, in some ways, they're speaking to us very clearly. These stones say, "We gathered here. This place mattered to us. We invested our sweat, our time, our creativity to make something that would last." These carvings say, "These animals were important to us. They were part of our world, our stories, our spiritual life." These enclosures say, "We could organize ourselves. We could work together. We could create beauty and meaning." That's not nothing. That's actually quite profound. Part 5, the broader context. Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. As excavations have continued in the region, other similar sites have been discovered. These sites, collectively called the Tars Tepeler, or Stone Hills, are revealing a whole network of ceremonial centers in this area. Karahan Tepe, discovered more recently, shows similar T-shaped pillars and carved reliefs. Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sifa Tepe, Sayburk, each new discovery adds to our understanding of this Neolithic culture. What we're seeing is evidence of a shared tradition. A common set of beliefs and practices that spread across the region. This wasn't just one anomalous site. This was a cultural phenomenon. Pause. And it existed during a crucial period in human history. We call it the pre-pottery Neolithic. The time before pottery, but after the end of the Ice Age. roughly 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. During this period, humans in the Fertile Crescent were undergoing a transformation that would change our species forever. They were transitioning from purely hunting and gathering to the beginnings of agriculture and animal domestication. At sites throughout the region, we see evidence of this transition. At Nevali Kori, another site in Turkey, archaeologists found T-shaped pillars similar to Göbekli Tepe, but also evidence of cultivated plants and the beginnings of permanent settlement. At Çatalhöyük, dating slightly later, we see one of the world's first true towns, with houses packed tightly together and sophisticated art, but still showing elements of that earlier symbolic tradition. Göbekli Tepe sits at the beginning of this transformation. It's a bridge between two worlds, the old world of mobile hunter-gatherers, and the new world of settled farmers. And it suggests that the transformation wasn't purely economic. It was also spiritual, social, and cultural. Think about what was happening in human consciousness during this period. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Identity was probably centered on small kinship groups. Territories were flexible. The relationship with the land was intimate but mobile. But at Göbekli Tepe, we see something new emerging. We see the idea of a permanent sacred place. A spot on the landscape that matters so much that people will return to it again and again, generation after generation. We see the willingness to invest enormous labor into something that serves no immediate practical purpose. You can't eat a carved pillar. It won't keep you warm or defend you from predators. But it feeds something else. Something spiritual. Something social. We see the beginning of monumental architecture. The idea that humans can reshape their environment not just for survival, but for meaning. And we see evidence of increasing social complexity. The ability to organize large groups, coordinate labor, maintain long-term projects. The seeds of political and religious hierarchy might be present here. Some scholars have suggested that Göbekli Tepe represents the birth of religion as we know it. Now, that's probably overstating it. Hunter-gatherers certainly had spiritual beliefs long before Göbekli Tepe. Burial practices, cave art, and other evidence show that humans have been grappling with questions of meaning and the sacred for tens of thousands of years. But what might have been born here is organized religion. Formalized religion. The kind that requires specific places, specific rituals, specific structures both physical and social. The kind of religion that could unite different groups under a common identity. The kind of religion that requires, well, priests or shamans or religious specialists of some kind. And once you have that, once you have people whose role is to maintain the sacred site, perform the rituals, preserve the knowledge, you have another step towards social stratification and complexity. You have another step towards civilization. Göbekli Tepe might have been where all of that began. Not because people discovered agriculture and therefore built temples. But perhaps because people built temples and therefore needed agriculture to sustain them. Religion first. Then everything else followed. Part 6, The End of Göbekli Tepe. All things must pass, even the greatest of human achievements. Around 8000 BCE, activity at Göbekli Tepe came to an end. But it wasn't a sudden catastrophe. It wasn't an invasion or a fire or a natural disaster. It was something quieter, more deliberate. The final structures were carefully, respectfully buried, just as the earlier ones had been. The site was covered over with soil and rubble. And then, people stopped coming. They didn't return the next season. They didn't build a new enclosure. The hilltop grew quiet. Grass covered the stones. Soil accumulated. Centuries passed, then millennia. The pillars lay in darkness, forgotten. Why did it end? Perhaps because the world had changed. By 8000 BCE, agriculture was no longer an experiment. It was becoming the way of life. People were settling into permanent villages. They were domesticating animals, planting crops, storing grain. The old ways, the seasonal gatherings, the great communal feasts at the sacred hilltop, perhaps these no longer fit the rhythm of agricultural life. When you're tied to fields that need tending, to animals that need daily care, you can't easily travel to distant ceremonial centers for extended periods. Or perhaps the beliefs changed. Religious practices evolve. What was sacred to one generation might become less important to the next. New sites, closer to the new villages, might have replaced Göbekli Tepe in people's spiritual lives. Or perhaps there was something else. A schism, a disaster, a loss of knowledge. We simply don't know. What we do know is that the people who buried Göbekli Tepe did so with care. They didn't desecrate it. They didn't destroy the pillars or deface the carvings. They covered it over, almost protectively. As if they were putting something precious to sleep. And in a way, they were ensuring its survival. Had the site remained exposed over the millennia, the pillars would have weathered, cracked, and crumbled. The carvings would have eroded away. Later peoples might have quarried the stones for their own buildings. But buried, protected by layers of earth, the stones were preserved in remarkable condition. The ancient builders, perhaps without knowing it, gave their creation the gift of time. And now, 12,000 years later, we stand at the beginning of truly understanding what they created. Part 7. What Göbekli Tepe teaches us. So what does Göbekli Tepe teach us, here at the end of our journey? First, it teaches us humility. For a long time, we thought we understood the story of civilization. We had it neatly laid out, simple to complex, primitive to advanced, an orderly progression from caves to cities. Göbekli Tepe shatters that neat narrative. It shows us that our ancestors 12,000 years ago were capable of far more than we credited them with. They could plan, organize, create beauty, express complex ideas, and build for eternity, all without agriculture, writing, or metal tools. They were fully human, just as intelligent and creative as we are. They simply lived in a different world, with different challenges and different solutions. Second, it teaches us about the power of shared belief. What could motivate people to invest so much effort in creating something that had no practical survival value? Faith. Spirituality. The human need for meaning and connection. Those massive pillars were raised not by force or coercion, but likely by willing participation. People gathered because they wanted to, because being part of something larger than themselves mattered. That's a deeply human impulse. It's the same impulse that builds cathedrals and temples even today. Third, it teaches us that the story of human development isn't linear. We don't simply move from point A to point B. We circle back. We try things and abandon them. We create magnificently and then forget how. We experiment with different ways of organizing society, different ways of relating to the sacred. History is messy, contingent, full of dead ends and false starts. The earliest structures at Göbekli Tepe are the most impressive. Over time, they got smaller and simpler. That's the opposite of what we usually expect. Usually we imagine technology and skill improving over time. But sometimes, knowledge is lost. Sometimes, priorities shift. Sometimes, the magnificent becomes the mundane. And fourth, perhaps most importantly, Göbekli Tepe teaches us that there is still so much we don't know. 95% of the site remains unexcavated. Who knows what still lies beneath that hill? What other stories, what other mysteries? And Göbekli Tepe is just one site among many. How many other ancient places still wait to be discovered? How many other stories of our ancestors remain untold? We've barely begun to understand our deep history. The story of how we became who we are is longer and stranger than we imagined. On that hilltop in Turkey, you can stand and look out over the landscape, much as the ancient builders did. The land rolls away in gentle hills. The sky stretches vast and blue. And beneath your feet, those ancient stones still stand, patient and enduring. They've waited 12,000 years to tell their story. And their story is, in the end, our story. The story of humans reaching for meaning, creating beauty, working together, building something that would outlast their own brief lives. That impulse, that deep human need, hasn't changed. We're still the same species that carved those pillars. We still seek connection, meaning, transcendence. We still gather in sacred places. We still tell stories about who we are and where we came from. Göbekli Tepe is a mirror, reflecting back to us something essential about ourselves. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. That across 12,000 years, across vast changes in technology and society and language, some things remain constant. The human heart still seeks wonder. Thank you for joining me on this journey, dear scholars. May you rest well, and dream of ancient stones beneath starlit skies. Until next time, sleep peacefully.